Welcome to Shenanigans Ensue with
Mary SanGiovanni!
Hi, folks. Welcome to Cosmic Shenanigans. I'm Mary SanGiovanni, and as always, I'm up to shenanigans of cosmic proportions. The next few episodes of Cosmic Shenanigans are going to look at a run of graphic novels called The Fall of Cthulhu. We're going to do each of them in parts because I feel like each of the collected issues, there's about 5 collected issues per graphic novel, really have interesting approaches to not just cosmic horror, but Lovecraftian horror specifically. As the title suggests, they do deal with Cthulhu to a point and other deities in the mythos that Lovecraft created. But they do some interesting new things with Lovecraftian horror that I think really overlaps modern cosmic horror in a kind of cool way. The first collected bunch of issues is called The Fugue. So this is part 1, okay? And in The Fugue, the story is by Michael Allen Nelson. Now, that's consistent throughout all of the whole run of Fall of Cthulhu, but the art varies. We're going to come back to talking about how that plays out. The art for issue 1 is by Greg Scott, Marco Rudy, Tim Hamilton, and Michelle Fief. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, and Pablo E. Gilligotti. The coloring is done by Joel Seguin, Mark Ruda, and Pablo E. Gilligotti again. And the reason that there are a number of artists is that it changes, the artist changes from issue to issue. Now, I know that I am not as familiar with comic books as I may be with some other media, so I don't know if that's a fairly common thing. I know that the art changing has both positive and negative effects, I think, on the comic book itself. So we're going to come back to that when we talk about that. This was published in June of 2008. Now, in issue 1, because it's a 6-part series, we have a different focus in each of the graphic novels, collected graphic novels, as I've mentioned. There are definite references throughout to Lovecraftian mythology, as I mentioned, with an interesting approach to the gods themselves. And that's one of the things I want to focus on in this particular episode, and also in the second episode, is the approach that the author makes toward the gods themselves and how they function. What we see is a sense of how the gods think, what their wants and needs are, and what their drives are. They struggle for power among themselves. They value strength, which is usually of a magical variety, and also of a physical variety through magic, and knowledge. They have no friends to speak of. They have limited loyalty. But one of the things I've noticed throughout is that they keep their word. These are entities that are, in many ways, beyond the scope of anything that we can comprehend. And yet, to them, if they make a promise, they keep it. Which I think is interesting for entities that are generally considered on the more evil side rather than the more indifferent side. The value of any other entities in their lives, particularly humans, is based on the human's loyalty and usefulness. They also value amusement. And here's a theory, which, I suppose could be contradicted, but it's my opinion that they value amusement as possibly the only true moments of light and levity in their lives, in their endless, ceaseless lives. And maybe the only true connection, however warped it may be, that they have with other entities is what these entities serve as amusement. I mean, this is the only real connection that they make with other people. And it is often the drive that seems to cause them to do the things that we would otherwise think are senseless. I mean, a lot of times, the idea behind Lovecraftian gods is that we can't possibly understand their motivations, nor do they really even have any understanding of us, but that they're so much bigger and more powerful than we are that their motivations are almost beyond our comprehension. But we do get a sense of motivation in works that try to delve into the psychology of the gods. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing, that knowledge, power, and amusement seem to be the three things that drive them. We have Niala Hota. Now, he's one of my favorite Lovecraftian gods. The reason for this, I think, is because he is essentially a kind of shapeshifter. He is a man of many masks, many faces, and he is the only god the only elder god. And I should make a quick distinction here between, in Lovecraft's mythology, you have elder gods and you have the old ones. The elder gods are creatures like Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, and Niala Hota. These are beings that are generally considered beyond anything we can comprehend. They're more like forces of nature. In prior episodes, I mentioned them being like black holes, that they're completely indifferent to us. They don't really even know we're here. And so long as they're not aware of our existence, we're probably okay. But they would almost just kind of smash their way through our existence if they were aware of us, just because to them we're like ants. Niala Hotep is different in this regard because he is their messenger, and he comes to people to deliver, messages from beyond space. The old ones are often seen as either the children of elder gods or as maybe one step down from elder gods. The old ones are powerful and godlike in their own right, but they are still, they have been defeated by the elder gods, and they are still this sort of secondary level of godlike creatures. And then you have a number of entities which are demigods or lesser gods, which are even below the old ones. So, but as I mentioned, Niala Hotep is kind of in this weird in-between place. In this particular comic, he comes across as a gentleman and a scholar, a priest and a sorcerer. But he is, true to Lovecraft's mythos, a mask wearer. He's a shapeshifter of many faces and many disguises. And for him, the whole point of existence is undermining the world with insanity and chaos. This sometimes means lulling people into a sense of normalcy and security, pretending to be a father figure, a confidant, a protector. But a lot of times his ultimate goal is to spread seeds of corruption and chaos. He, in a lot of Lovecraft's work, and this particularly is a theme that carries throughout this particular series of graphic novels, is that the masks of the Lovecraftian or cosmic horror, that theme is really of malleable bodies and changing shape. Figures through the run do this in a lot of fun and interesting ways. And it begins with Niala Hotep. He calls them guises, but they're basically different shapes that he wears in order to interact with human beings. As he puts it, in order to avoid basically the harassment of having to move through, the society of lesser beings without, being bothered by them being terrified of his actual appearance. What I think is interesting in this comic series about Niala Hotep, about his characterization, is that he amasses human vessels in order to call forth his most faithful. These I think of as lesser gods. They're not really old ones. They're not quite that powerful, but they are absolutely faithful and devoted to Niala Hotep. He chooses primarily the innocent, the previously uncorrupted, and that is, pretty much directly from Lovecraft's characterization of him, that he delights in corrupting the uncorrupted. His minion Connor, who we're going to talk about more next week in episode 2, has been a loyal companion for years, and he also has a cat named Nemesis. Now, the cat also, when we talk about toward the end of the series, we'll talk again about more about this cat Nemesis, but these are the only two beings, these two alone, that he shows anything even approaching human emotion. There's a vague sort of muted sense of pride and affection for them that, again, is limited because he is not a human being and does not contain true human emotions. But I do think it's interesting that throughout the series, he'll say to Connor, well, you're a good boy. You're a good boy. You know, as if that matters to him, which I find that sort of interesting. Now, another really cool aspect of this particular series, and this episode in particular where we are introduced to it, is Lovecraft's Dreamlands. Now, the way that Lovecraft characterized the Dreamlands in many of his stories was not that it was this sort of perfect, utopian paradise kind of place, but you do often get the idea that many of the human beings who wish to go there think of it that way. They think of it as a paradise, as an escape from the real world that just doesn't understand them. There is violence there. There is a certain degree of ugliness, but there is also this unlimited beauty and power and magic. In the Dreamlands of this interpretation of the Dreamlands, it's a place that very much mirrors the strangeness, the surrealism of dreams, but focuses on the terrifying aspects of it. It's really more nightmare lands. The Dreamlands exist as an alternate dimension accessible by sleep, which I think is really kind of the only reason it is considered the Dreamlands. But it's otherwise really just an alternate plane of existence where gods rule and interact with human souls. And there is some power struggling going on in the Dreamlands in terms of who really has dominion over the lands. One of the things that's interesting about the art, as I mentioned, it varies, but one of the deliberate variations in the art is that the Dreamlands is drawn very differently from the, quote, the real world, the waking world sequences. That the real world, waking world sequences are drawn with a very realistic approach to art, a very, very detailed, very, realism is the style. In the Dreamlands, though, it is a lot more surreal, a lot more blurred. Colors are brighter in the Dreamland, but the definition and the details of things are a lot more muted, pretty much like we would see in dreams. One of my favorite characters in the comic series is a character introduced as the Harlot. Okay, she is a feminine character, and we're going to come back to why that's important. She's a female character who has a very strange aspect to her. She's got this big bouffant of a hairdo, this black hair with this big pink bow, and she's got green skin. She's shown in the first issue to have a mouth that stretches literally almost from ear to ear. The mouth is a very prominent feature, and she wears a tight little dress, almost like a Victorian kind of dress, and she is very much an embodiment of sexuality, both positively and negatively. There's a grotesqueness to her, a horror to her that would be maybe the ugly, terrifying aspect of sex. But what I find interesting about her is that she is also known as the keeper of secrets. She's a lusty, sensual, terrifying creature. She's occasionally referred to as a witch, which would make sense in a Lovecraftian setting because women were either vessels or insignificant, or they were some type of witch, some type of bewitching evil creature that you can't interact with without losing a part of yourself. And that's very much the case here. But she does it with style. She really does. She keeps a series of boxes, probably millions of boxes, which are a physical representation, in my opinion, of the Lovecraftian notion of ultimate sacrifice for ultimate knowledge. If you end up in one of her boxes, okay, which in and of itself has a sexual, connotation to it. If you end up in one of her boxes, you cannot leave unless she lets you go. But once you are in that box, you will know the secrets of everything. Everything. But you give up your freedom to do it because it will drive you mad. So you are in a prison of your own insanity. You are also soul-wise, physically imprisoned in this box. You become a toy for her. You become a pretty thing she keeps in a box. These are primarily prisons for men who have trouble with dealing with certain earthly issues, certain physical issues. And she is very much, she's very much a physical kind of being. But she also represents, women in, as I mentioned, in Lovecraftian stories, don't have a lot of agency, but she certainly does. Now, there are goddesses in his pantheon. I get the impression she is not one of them, based on things that she says in this issue and in future. She is not the level even of an old one, but she certainly may well be a lesser goddess of some type. She embodies intellect, seductiveness, resourcefulness, bravery, foresight, and craftiness. However, she also reflects a frightful kind of power, of vengefulness, occasional cruelty and sadism, and sinister machination. She is, as enjoyable a character as she is, you are reminded from time to time that she is not one to be trifled with. She is not one to be messed with. And she is one of the only ones who is fearless in standing up to actual gods. Now, we also have the Necronomicon. I mean, I'm not sure any Lovecraftian story would be complete without it. It is certainly present in this particular series. And so is its author, who we never see. I don't know that I've come across any cosmic horror yet that actually uses Abdul al-Hazred as a character. But he is in this. He serves the purpose, and I apologize for forgetting what the actual name is. But in ancient Greek plays, there would also often be this sort of chorus. I think they might have been the chorus, actually. Beings that would tell you kind of what's going on above and over the heads of the characters. They were almost like the narrator that would sort of pop in. The Rod Serlings of ancient Greece. He functions a little bit as that from time to time, but essentially he is a being that I think and basically embodies the idea of the past and present coming together. The idea that there are things that we are not meant to know, but you can't keep that knowledge from people indefinitely. So we do have the Necronomicon, which is the sum total of all of his labors. The book is an important instrument in both the summoning and banishing of entities in Lovecraft's greater and lesser pantheons. So it also serves to provide the information to characters regarding secrets. Okay? And as I mentioned earlier, I think with the Harlot, secrets is an important theme throughout this series. Keeping secrets, divulging secrets, discovering secrets. That has always been a driving force in nearly all of Lovecraft's work. And we've talked about that in past episodes, this idea that you are there, then there's a narrator and then there's the main character, and the main character is driven by that desire to obtain forbidden knowledge, almost to the point of his own destruction. And that's where we get to the main character in this particular set of issues in part 1, who is Psy. He's a college student who, in true Lovecraftian fashion, can't stop searching for the information regarding the suicide of his uncle Walt, an anthropology professor at Miskatonic. If this sounds a little bit like the Call of Cthulhu setup, it probably should. We have a lot of reflection there of that kind of thing. The cost of knowledge is a strange journey and a very costly one. His fiancée, who, to be honest, comes across as absolutely insufferable to me, but she goes to great lengths to get him to give up this search, to try to convince him, your uncle was just crazy, let it go. But he can't. This uncle raised him after his parents died, him and his sister, and killed himself in front of Psy. So Sai feels this very strong urge to almost avenge or find closure in this suicide by discovering why. And as we find over the course of this episode, as is true in any kind of Lovecraftian story, this does not bode well for him. This costs him friends, it costs him family, and ultimately it costs him Jordan, the fiance, that but he cannot stop this pursuit of knowledge. Now, again, that's a spoiler, but there's other spoilers that involve, the interconnection of these characters, which is really pretty fascinating. What happens to Sai, how he ultimately reconciles all of this loss, and what it does to him essentially is the introduction of madness, which is also a pervasive element in Lovecraft's work. And it's no less true in this particular series, that one of the things I find interesting is this idea that knowledge is both a gift and a curse. That to know things, even as far as the gods are concerned, to know things is a great power, but it's also a punishment. It's also a burden. And it is used that way in this particular series. What Sai knows is, by the end of this particular set of issues, is limitless, but it destroys him. It breaks him as a person. So that's issue 1. We're going to be coming back next week with issue 2, and we'll cover the whole run of this. It really is an incredibly good comic book. It's a lot of fun. It's a fast read, and it has lots of cosmic shenanigans in it that you will absolutely love. So we will take episode part 2 with the next episode. So if you are interested in other cosmic shenanigans, you can listen to past, present, and future episodes on Project Entertainment Network, Spotify, Apple, iTunes. I think it might be Apple Books now, iHeartRadio, and all the other platforms that offer podcasts for free. You can also catch me on The Horror Show with Brian Keene, which is available through those very same channels. You can check out engineer Matt Wildeson's podcast, Grindcast. You can also pick up his new book, Horrors Untold, which includes some delightfully Lovecraftian and cosmic horror goodness. And we will see you next week. Bye.
How do people who make stuff up for a living make stuff up?
New York Times bestseller Jonathan Mayberry told us.
Oprah's book club favorite Sue Miller told us.
You sort of take a character and make some bad things happen.
How'd we get them to do that?
We collared them, just like at a cocktail party, except through your headphones.
Join us every Thursday for the Liars Club Oddcast,
a slightly unhinged podcast where storytellers interview other storytellers.
Available on Project Entertainment Network, iTunes, and everywhere podcasts are heard.